Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone in today's class for the 6th elementary grade. Our textbook is Weekend 3 and today inshallah we're going to cover Unit 7, Fun on the Weekend, the lesson of grammar in action on page 53. This lesson will be presented by me, teacher Mazen Harbi, and the sign language by Mr. Fawaz Al-Agil. So let's begin. Quick revision on our last lesson. In our last lesson, we learned that when we are using the regular verbs to talk about something in the past, we don't change anything to the verb. Whether if we are talking about ourselves, or we're talking about someone else, whether he or she or even a group of people, or if you are talking to the person in front of you, so no matter who we are talking to, we don't make any changes to the verb. Now, just a quick reminder, let's try to read these sentences again and to remind ourselves that, or to learn that we don't make any changes to the verb no matter who is the person that did this verb or did this action. So number one, listen and practice. So I'm going to read it and I would like you to read it with me. Number one, I practiced. I practiced. You practiced. You practiced. He practiced. He practiced. She practiced. She practiced. We practiced. We practiced. You practiced. You practiced. They practiced. They practiced. So, with all of the verbs, irregular verbs especially, we don't make any changes to the verb. Whether if you're talking about yourself, or you're talking about the person in front of you, or if you are talking about other people, whether they are alone or in a group, or if you're talking about yourself with others. So no matter who we are talking to, we don't make any changes. So now, after this, we did listen and chant about the past tense regular verb chant. And we did learn that how to pronounce each of these verbs and also how to use them in sentences. So using these verbs in sentences help us to know the meaning of these verbs. So now let's do the chant again, and I would like you to repeat and say it with me. So number one, the first verb we have here is practiced. So let's chant the verb practiced. Number one, practiced, practiced. I practiced my English. I practiced my English. Very well. Now let's move on to number two. Watched, watched. You watched a DVD. You watched a DVD. So with this one, on the first part, we read about two verbs. The first one is practiced. When you practice something, it means that you do exercises, you listen, you speak, you write. This is what we mean by I practiced my English, like what we are doing now. And also the second verb, which is watched. You watched a DVD, or you watched a lesson. Watched. Now let's move on to the other pairs of verbs and practice them as well. So number three, the verb is cooked. Say it with me. Cooked, cooked. She cooked breakfast. She cooked breakfast. Number 4, kicked. Kicked. He kicked a ball. He kicked a ball. So here in this part we did learn 2 new verbs. The first one is cooked. What do you mean by she cooked breakfast? We mean that she is making meals. She made meals for the breakfast. And next, kicked, he kicked a ball. This is how we play football. We kicked a ball. Now, let's move on to the other pair of verbs. Number 5, say with me, cleaned. Cleaned. They cleaned the house. They cleaned the house. Number 6, stayed. Stayed. We stayed at home. We stayed at home. Very well. So here we learn also other 2 verbs, which is cleaned. They cleaned the house. To clean something and to make it look neat. And also the other verb, number 6, stayed. We stayed at home. We stayed at home. We didn't go anywhere. We stayed at home. Now, other verbs we have, number 7. Let's say it and repeat after me. Played. Played. You played outside. You played outside. Number 8, studied. Studied. You studied a little. You studied a little. Very well, and these other 2 verbs, the first one, played, when we are having fun and we're moving around. This is what do you mean by played outside. And the verb studied is that when you prepare for school and when you answer questions and doing your homework. This is what we call studied. Now, all of these new verbs that we did learn, and we learned their meaning as well, all of them are used in the same form, the same addition with ed, and we use them to talk about the things that we did in the past or the things that we did last weekend. And not only this, but also we did learn last lesson about the difference between the sounds of each of these verbs. So last lesson we did learn that some of the verbs that ends with ed, even if they or all of them ends with the same letters, but they have different sounds at the end. And we gave example on some of them. Now let's remind ourselves of those differences, and then we can say them and repeat them again. So the third exercise we had is when we listen and practice and we do these activities or practice in pairs. So, and remember, we're only talking about here the regular verbs, the verbs that ends with ed. So the first group of verbs that ends with ed ends with the sound that says t, t. So repeat after me. 4 verbs ends with ed, we say t, t. Say with me, t, t. So now we're going to read a verbs that ends with this sound, the sounds of t. So the first verb we have is practice. In the past it will be practiced. Practiced. Say with me, practiced. Next, watch. Watched. Watched. Say with me, watched. And cook. Cooked. Cooked. Say with me, cooked. And then kick. Kicked. Kicked. Say with me, kicked. Very well. So these verbs are the kind of verbs that has the same letters, E and D ends, but with different sound, the sounds of T at the end of each of them. Now, let's get to know the other part of the regular verbs. So, for some verbs that ends with ed, we say d at the end. Let's read a couple of examples. The first example we have is clean, cleaned, cleaned. Say with me, cleaned. And then blade, blade, blade. Say with me, blade. And then study, studied, studied. Say with me, studied. Now, we can practice all of these verbs and we can even do it in pairs. So you may ask someone, maybe a friend or a classmate or maybe a family member, to say a verb first and then you say how it is pronounced. And maybe you can switch. Maybe you can say the verb and he would say it in the past tense or in the past simple. And now, let's get to know our objectives in today's lesson. In today's lesson, we hope that you will be able to decide the past form of verbs and write verbs in the past simple correctly, and also to talk about weekends using the past simple tense. So what we are going to do in this page, pages 53, first I would like to open your books on page 53. I would like you please to open your books on page 53. You will see an interesting game that we're going to play today. So this game, what we're going to do is that I would like you to write and play the game that is we call the verb game and beat a partner. To beat a partner. But let's understand this game first. And what I'm going to show you here, I'm going to show you to you as a practice, as an example. This is not yet the real game. So what we are going to do, have a look at all of these verbs. And what I want you to do is that when you listen to the teacher saying a couple of sentences, I would like you to underline the verbs that you heard from the teacher. So, for example, when I talk about, when I said, for example, he watched a DVD. So what I want you to do when you listen to the verb he watched, then I would like you to go here and underline the word watched. This is how we're going to play this game. But first, let's read the verbs right here so we do have how they sound when we hear them. The first one, or the first verb, is cooked, watched, practiced, kicked, cleaned, played, studied, and stayed. So let's begin this game. Again, I'm going to say sentences, couple of sentences, and what I want you to do is to underline the verb that you hear from me. So I'm going to say them twice. I'm going to say them twice. So let's begin now by saying these sentences. I would like you to listen and also to know, to underline the verb that you hear. So let's begin. For the first time, I practiced on the trampoline. He kicked a ball. You played outside. You watched a DVD. We stayed at school. She cooked breakfast. Very well. Now, these are the sentences. I hope that you did underline some of the verbs. Now, let's do it again. And this time, make sure that you don't miss any of the verbs that I am about to say. Now, let's do it one more time. So now I'm going to say the sentences and make sure you don't miss any verb. Let's start. I practiced on the trampoline. He kicked a ball. You played outside. You watched a DVD. We stayed at school. She cooked breakfast. Very well. Now, after saying these sentences, I hope that you did catch a couple of the verbs that you heard. So, answer with me here, what are the verbs that we said? So, the first verb that I said, one of them is practiced. When I say, I practiced on the trampoline. I hope you got this right. And also, the other verb we said, which is kicked. He kicked the ball. And the other verb we said, played. And watched a DVD. Watched a DVD. And stayed. So these are, and also cooked. These were the verbs that you heard when I said them. Now, let us move on to the real game now. So in this real game, what you're going to have is you're going to have a table like this. And what you're going to do exactly is to write, not to underline, but to write the verbs that you are about to hear. So in the previous one, you already had the verbs in front of you and you only underline them. But now you need to write down all of the verbs that you hear. So now I'm going to say these sentences and I would like you to, after finishing, to pause the video and write down what you heard, the verbs that you heard. So in this exercise, we're going to do it only once. And you can later on do the same exercise with your friends or with your classmate. So now let's listen to the second sentences in verb game 2. So make sure that you write down all of the verbs that you hear. They cleaned the car. They cleaned the car. You played outside. You played outside. You watched a DVD. You watched a DVD. She cooked breakfast. She cooked breakfast. We stayed at school. We stayed at school. You studied a little. You studied a little. He practiced his English. He practiced his English. I kicked a ball. I kicked a ball. Very well. So now we have said all of the 8 sentences and then you will have 8 verbs. I hope that you will be able to write all the verbs correctly. And I will give you a little bit of hint. They are similar to the verb game 1. And now, at the end of our lesson, it's very important that you will be able to say the past form of 6 regular verbs and also to say 2 things that I did over the weekend. And now we have reached the end of our lesson. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you next time.